One quick little note before we start. Sticky MZ, a fellow member of the lore community who is predominantly on TikTok but also is somewhat on YouTube, was recently hit by the hurricane that's been going through the US. If you want to go ahead and support them, just go ahead and do them a favor and watch a little bit more of their content than you usually would. The reason being for that is because hopefully it helps to push just a little bit more ad revenue his way so that he can help get through a tough time. That's an extraordinary circumstance, but if you do have a few spare minutes in your day, go ahead and check out one of his shorts or maybe one of his longer form videos on YouTube. Check him out, I'll leave a link to him down below in the description, and thank you very much. Greetings Guardians, my name is Byfear. So, really quickly, I just want to let you know the Bungie stream, as of recording this, finished a few hours ago, and I made a big Twitter thread talking about all of the different things they talked about. I want to go over that, and I want to also talk about some of my own thoughts on each of these individual larger topics. Predominantly, this is going to be about Frontiers, but at very least in the thread, I'm summarizing both what's happening in Frontiers that they revealed, and also things that are coming to Revenant. So, I'll go over all of that, and I'm going to focus on more of the narrative details, but there is some gameplay stuff looped in here. So, starting off with Revenant. The Fanatic, of course, is the core of Revenant, and he has acquired one of the Echoes. He's looking to evolve and grow the Scorn as a faction and a force, changing them in ways that we've not seen, as well as building a grander army with them. That, of course, requires a lot of dead Eliksni, but as a result, that means we're teaming up with Mithrax and Eido. Lots of this stuff is stuff we already knew, but if you're new to Revenant, this is the theme of the entire expansion. That and the whole vibe of just being a monster hunter of some kind. I'm going to go ahead and actually make this note here. I'm going to release a video closer to the release of Revenant that goes over all of the stuff you should expect out of the story. So look forward to that, that'll be out on Monday. Now, Eido is another part of this, and apparently she has a lot of lore and knowledge on the Eliksni, of course, as one would expect, but also on herbology. And this leads us to the whole tonics mechanic. That means you can either boost your artifact perks, or you can chase more specific gear. Not hugely relevant, but, you know, inevitably Bungie loops these mechanics in with the story, so we'll see how that goes. New Onslaught modes have been added. That includes Onslaught Salvation, and it's specifically against factions that appear to be aligned more with the Scorn, so you see things like Shadow Legion, Scorn themselves, and, I don't know, potentially this also includes the Dread. We'll have to figure out and see when we actually get it in our hands, but don't take everything on the Dread to be my word exactly, because I think we didn't quite see them in the reveal. I might have seen like an Attendant or a Weaver on screen at one point, I'm not 100% sure. Either way, the point is, new stuff is going on in that mode, and it's more specifically geared towards what's happening in Revenant. So, instead of going into the Pyramid ship at Wave 6, you will instead go into a Scorn nest, and you will fight these new enemies that you'll find, known as Scorn Revenant Barons. And it appears they have kind of a phylactery/resurrection mechanic. Basically, when you kill them, you need to destroy their totem, or they'll respawn. It's a little bit like the dead ghost of a Hive Guardian, except you don't interact with it using a nice chonky crunch. Instead, you give it a shot or two and it just dies. So there's a bit of a hide and seek to that. You can chase the Revenant totem as it flees from you across the map. If you don't kill it in time, it respawns the Revenant Baron. So you have another boss that you need to fight all over again. It seems pretty fine in terms of mechanics, but as far as the actual narrative of this goes, that means a deeper power of the Scorn is being unlocked by the Echo, I think. Because Scorn do come back, and they are basically immortal, being undead, but that speaks to a more intimate control of that power, and it speaks to some kind of deepening of what they already are. It's also worth noting there's a bunch of interesting stuff going on actually inside all of these different Onslaught maps. We saw Widow's Court, and it was weird because it was covered in egregore. That has interesting connotations to darkness and death itself, so the vibe of the Scorn is going into really gnarly places with all of that. It's not entirely clear what's going on, but if egregore is involved, that means that there is a deeper reach into realms of darkness themselves. So expect something along the lines of Fikrul's power reaching new heights with that Echo to kind of help explain why all of that's going on. It's also worth remembering that when you go in and actually do the Wave 6 encounter, you're going in to save captured Eliksni, and that's weird because normally the Scorn don't capture Eliksni, they kill them and then crowd the bodies around so they can be resurrected. Having Eliksni captured that are alive speaks to some horrifying possibilities. I don't know precisely what's going on there, but I think that there is the chance of something to do with vampirism. This has been mentioned a few times when discussing just everything to do with Revenant generally, and the vibe that the team is going for. I'll have more of that on the Monday video and talk a little bit more about it then, but for now, keep an eye out on that. There's a reason why they're being captured alive. You will need to free them from those cages. Of course, this means that there are going to be some characters alongside you who are going to be dealing with a bunch of this, not just people like Mithrax and Ido who are at the core of our side of the story, but you can also expect Crow to be there because, of course, Fikrul is the problem that he created in his old life as Uldren Sov, and it's his responsibility to fix it. And given that this is a problem that threatens the whole of the Eliksni, you can expect additional appearances from Spider, Variks, and of course, Eramis, the Kell of the House of Dusk. There's been a lot hinting to the idea that Ido in particular is going to contact Eramis so that she can assist everyone in this particular weird moment as everyone tracks down and hunts the different members of Fikrul's band, so expect to see some very interesting beef going along with all of that. And, well, that kind of pushes us forward to another small story note. Inverted Spire is returning, and it's being adjusted as per the whole thing of revamping old strikes and returning them at a slightly more reasonable level of challenge. Imagine that that involves the Vex that we faced in this last episode, and yeah, you kind of get the idea of what that's probably going to be like. I would imagine that if there's a group invading and they want to keep something vaguely similar to what's going on, they could go with the Cabal Shadow Legion. Maybe they're there specifically at the orders of Fikrul because the Shadow Legion are actually kind of throwing in their lot with Fikrul because he has an Echo. Similarly, he might be seeking another Echo, hence why he's tasked the Shadow Legion with invading the Inverted Spire, because maybe he's going to try and go after Maya's Echo, which means we would see the Choral Vex facing off against the Shadow Legion and possibly some Scorn from Fikrul's band. I don't know, we'll see what happens when that actually releases. I just hope they do more with the tank section, that would be fun. And of course there is also the dungeon race. Stuff coming along with that means that we'll be exploring Vesper's host. No story details on that, Bungie is keeping it very close to their chest. Excited as I may be for that, there's an entire video that I made the other day where I talked about it at length and what we might see in it, so go ahead and check that out if you're interested. That is the end of the Revenant section, but then we immediately shifted gears into Frontiers, and this is where we were joined by Robbie Stevens and Alison Lurs. Alison Lurs, of course, is the one that we in the lore community know well. She is the narrative lead over at Bungie on Destiny. So, diving right in, some details. More medium-sized expansions as opposed to large, big ones. That is the format that we've all heard about, that's nothing new, we learned about it in the Apollo reveal. They're moving from one all-consuming tentpole moment that sucks all the oxygen out of the room to having two of those moments in a year. And apparently the size of those is going to be something comparable to Rise of Iron in Destiny 1. Each of those two expansions is aiming to have stuff that you can dive into for endgame. Brand new experiences will be releasing with every expansion, and at least for Apollo, there's a new destination. I think they've confirmed there will be a new destination in every expansion, but I'm not 100% on that. The destination is very Metroidvania inspired. It features a non-linear campaign and it's designed with that in mind, both in terms of the actual map that you'll be exploring and the narrative structure of the campaign. Players can go and uncover locations at their choice, and it expands the story as you go. Lots of different story threads will unlock as you find all of these different destinations to explore and all of these different story missions that you can tackle in any order. There are something, as Alison said, like 25 to 30 different threads of story notes that crisscross between the missions, which I don't know how that'll present itself exactly in-game, but that's nice to hear. If there's a lot of stuff that really pulls a lot more essence out of each mission according to what happened in the other previous missions, that sounds good. The note about narratives in Destiny 2 here is that the 2 expansion structure now allows a more persistent tone of pacing. The other reason for going with 2 expansions in a year is focus. As well as having pacing, which means that you're able to consistently push to make sure that you have new content rolling out and you're not bogged down waiting for an annual release and it doesn't feel like you're waiting forever for the story to move forward. You also have the point of focusing on those big plot points in each expansion. So when you have an expansion that's, I don't know, all about the Vex or all about the Hive, you're going all in on that granular focus and on that idea. It is going to be the fixation of that particular expansion, and it's going to explore it more deeply. A note about the seasonal story structure was also brought up, and this is a really good note, something that we'd heard, but we needed more confirmation on, which is that by the time we get to Apollo, the seasonal story structure that we've seen will be more or less gone. That means no more running back to the helm to listen to a radio message, no more waiting for someone to contact you on the holoprojector, no more sitting there and doing one mission and then seeing a cutscene play out in the helm. That is going to be more or less gone by the time that you get to Apollo. It's starting to be slowly phased out in Revenant. We know that they're already bunching all of the content in each of the individual acts together, so you can play all the story stuff back to back. I imagine we'll see less of that structure when we get to Heresy, because they'll have had more time to edit and work on it so that they can adjust the experience. But by the time we hit Apollo, that next expansion, it will be gone completely. Bungie wants to get players out there in the world and bring the information to them so they can keep playing Destiny, and they don't have the weird intermittent breaks in the story structure. So that's really nice. I imagine that also applies to all of the future updates that they have, where they drop some additional story stuff or some extra gameplay stuff, whatever it may be, alongside that kind of 3-month in update when there's a release that's finished up. Bungie also showed off 2 new pieces of concept art, which, yeah, Martin will go ahead and show those on the screen for just a second. So, our first piece of concept art that we see for Apollo is this one here. It features what looks like some kind of elaborate ceremony. Everyone is wearing ornamental robes. There is some kind of sigil that's all over these banners, which I don't quite understand the nature of, but lots of concentric circles can be seen here. Things on these look potentially like the orbits of planets around the sun. The thing that's also interesting is what's up above. It's a massive engine frame, literally the underneath of like the engine's exhaust, where all the flame would come out of a massive rocket ship. And whatever's reaching down looks either like some kind of ethereal energy, or it looks like it's a hologram of something. No clue what's going on here. This looks as though it's a human civilization, given the number of limbs and whatnot. You see people with 2 arms and no excess of legs, but at the same time, it's not clear who these people might actually be and what's going on with where they're placed. I think that it would be appropriate to sit there and consider whether this is kind of a refugee/survivor faction that has pulled itself together somewhere else in the ruins of Sol. If you look at the potential for other colony ships to have landed on other distant planetoids that might have been terraformed by the Traveler, or might just have some kind of sustainable atmosphere, this might be vaguely where they're sitting. And I mean, look in the background to it all. Aside from the altar, you see a bunch of tents and a bunch of habitation, some prefabricated shelters of some kind. All of this kind of points to the idea that this entire society is centrally based around whatever's going on here, so it's important. We may, if we're talking to any leaders in this society, be going ahead and directly approaching the priesthood of whoever's doing this, because again, this looks like a ritual. This is a ceremony. The more you look at this, the more it gets interesting, because again, the main thruster engine may be what they're underneath, but you also see columns in the background that are kind of supporting that structure, which implies that everything has sort of been built up over time, and yet also there's these weird tents that are around where everyone lives in. So maybe that tells us something about the society. Maybe the places in which they live are nowhere near as important as the structure in which they worship. Don't know, that's all very speculative. But there's a second image that comes along, and that tells us a whole lot more and is very interesting all in its own. This second image here does look a little bit nebulous, but I think this tells us where this might actually be. First of all, go ahead and focus on the left-hand side there. That looks like a staircase reaching up into that stalactite that's now become an adjoined column. More importantly, the set of columns has been built into the entirety of everything here over time through natural processes by the looks of things. So it tells us we're in an underground cave region. That may not necessarily track with everything, but assuming we see those staircases built into the side of it, that means that these societies are actually living within these kind of structures. And that tells us we would be looking at somewhere that has some kind of underground cave system capable of supporting life. This personally makes me think it's Ganymede, but again, there's no easy confirmation on any of that. Everything here could be placeholders. I will say though, if you're going to look for a very large area that's going to give you a place where you can just sort of plonk a bunch of human civilization that we've not explored in Destiny, Ganymede is most certainly the thing. And those ideas of concentric rings looking like a solar system could be anything, including the orbit of the many planets of Jupiter, of which Ganymede is the largest. It's also worth remembering that a place like this presents interesting exploration possibilities. I mean, this place looks like the Feydark. I don't know if you've ever played D&D, but in D&D there is a place called the Feywild. It's kind of a realm of magic and wild energy where everything and anything could happen. It's particularly dangerous, but also particularly whimsical. And then there is a place in the normal realm called the Underdark, which is literally a massive cave network underground that spans the entirety of Faerun. This looks like the Feydark, which is the Underdark within the Feywild, where all sorts of wild and chaotic nonsense crashes together with those two themes being brought into one. As for what that means, I think we're going to be looking at an entire human civilization that has survived and has delved deep into these caves in order to do so. Because if this is somewhere like Ganymede, you're going to look at a human civilization that might predominantly have been wiped out, but might have been able to scrounge up a living if they delved deep enough into it. As for the rest of the energy here, I don't know what's going on, but the ethereal blue that's coming off of some of the pillars and is sort of flowing down almost like a river, it sort of tells me that there's more to this place than just the ability to survive. It tells me that there's a kind of resource or an energy here that could be exploited. Who knows what's going on with that? That's my best guess at current. I also say that partly because of the fact that, well, this concept art is vague, and it's really just nothing more than giving open-ended things that bring confirmation bias on my end. So, who knows what this could be? This is the moment at which you definitely want to go ahead and leave your own thoughts down below in the chat and the comments section, because, yeah, there is no easy way to confirm things. It just confirms scale, if anything else. There were notes in the livestream about how the story would potentially take us to go to the heart of the planet. Not sure if that means that we are actually exploring a planet as opposed to a moon, but planet is kind of a interchangeable thing. If it is a planet as opposed to a moon though, I imagine that's probably going to be somewhere like Pluto. We've already explored Mercury, we've explored Venus, Mars has come and gone in various iterations in Destiny. Earth I think is a little bit too pedestrian for all of this stuff, although not impossible. So that really leaves us with Pluto, or maybe something even further out, such as the 10th planetoid body from the orbit of the Sun, which is actually called Eris. Yes, I know. Eris, that Eris. If it is Eris, there's actually really interesting lore to note about that, because Mara and Eris herself supposedly interacted with and possibly destroyed a pyramid ship above Eris. Not sure what's happening there, not sure what happens generally, but if that lore is to be believed, it could make for a very interesting destination. Again, there is nothing to suggest it's any of these, and hell, that's just from the note of potentially moving towards the heart of the planet in all of this. There is another big point, which was that the concepts of Apollo, and I presume at least Behemoth as well, are aiming at bringing back mystery to Destiny. As for the creative inspirations, the team was listening to 1960s music, the film Slaughterhouse-5, and the Scavenger's Reign TV show for all of their inspiration when it comes to everything that you see in Apollo. A final teaser was also given to us from Alison Lurs, where she talks about the idea of you walking into an old mansion, and the idea that you go into the parlor of this mansion, and that there is a bookcase there, and that someone sits and tells you that there is a hidden door. And that, you know, we understand the context of it. There's a false book in the bookcase, and the bookcase itself is actually a secret door, so we can go ahead and slide that open. This new saga is meant to be like that. It's like we're opening a door that's always been in front of us. So with that in mind, we can get to a point where we are pushing forward and exploring something which is familiar, and yet also can be seen in an entirely new context. I hope I'm not butchering that analogy, because I certainly felt like I was going to butcher it when I was tweeting it out, but the point is this. That's one of the interesting things where they're going to try and push for more mystery in Destiny, and for something familiar to have its context changed entirely. So, what are the big takeaways? Well, for Frontiers at very least, Rise of Iron-sized expansions twice a year are in. The removal of the old seasonal narrative structure by the time Apollo releases is slated to happen. There will be an attempt to revive Mystery, and there will be a non-linear campaign. Let's go ahead and give you thoughts on each of those. As far as Rise of Iron-sized expansions twice a year are concerned, that's an interesting content cadence, but personally I do hope that there is a little bit of a increase in the scope of the amount of story content we get per expansion every single time one of those releases. Not incrementally, you understand, just compared to Rise of Iron, because whilst the theme of Rise of Iron was very well focused and had a lot of stuff to it, 5 missions did not feel like a lot. And that's partly also because of the fact that Rise of Iron is essentially 3 missions. 2 of those missions are filler. In one of them, you just go to Mars and fall down an elevator shaft, and in another one, you literally just jump through a few hoops and kill a few people in a new version of the Cosmodrome that is not actually in the Plaguelands. Missions 1, 3, and 5 are the real missions of Rise of Iron, and I hope we get to avoid that when it comes to Apollo and everything moving forward. 6 missions would be nice, and I think that it's also important to understand here that this needs to keep in mind the scale of story after everything is done. I will say though, if they at least hit the note of the Rise of Iron-sized campaigns having a really focused theme, that's not bad. I think that there is the potential for something to be really good there, but I just don't know if it's going to be big enough for some players. It's a more bite-sized Destiny experience, and it also means that we're going to be looking at something which has a few faults, potentially, if it's not done correctly. And this is actually something I want to touch on with the non-linear campaign. I think that there is a lot of hubbub and talk about the non-linear campaign with some concern, and I think some of that is based on the fact that it reminds people a little bit of Destiny 1 vanilla, because you could technically do a lot of those missions almost in any order. You know, you did the top and tail of each planet at that particular moment, but by the time you'd open each planet up, you need to go ahead and realize that you can sit there and play the missions in almost any order, and it doesn't really matter. And that's a problem for Destiny 1's vanilla campaign, because the narrative feels very, well, sort of scattered. Each individual note doesn't really bind the story together as much as you might hope it would. However, the non-linear campaign structure where you can jump between destinations is something that's been kept in mind from the very beginning, and that's, I think, the key difference, because Destiny 1's campaign was remade quickly after the entire thing got scrapped midway through development. This has been designed this way, and it's been built and structured so that it works like this. So it's something where I'm willing to wait and see. It may be the case that it is just worse than a structured single line of a campaign, where you're just going from mission to A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you play those in that order and that's it. I still don't know if that's necessarily the best way to go ahead and do it, but I'm at least willing to give that a try, knowing that this has been built in this regard. The attempt to revive mystery on things, well, I feel like that's kind of more important now than ever. I've talked in previous videos about how getting more expansive lore out there in the game and getting more mysteries back into the game lays the foundation and the groundwork for the future. You know, this is the reason why we have characters like Saint 14. This is the reason why people see individuals like Clovis Bray making an impact in the game. This is why we saw the expansion of characters like Rasputin. You know, you have these big ticket mysteries within the game, and they sometimes get answered right away, especially if they're at the core of a story. And in other instances, it's just something where you see it slowly build over time in the background. All of the stuff we have on Saint 14 now is because we had a single exotic helmet for Titans back in the day. That's it. That's the only reason. Like, legitimately, nothing else. That's built out an entire character, and a character that I think is very well loved by a bunch of people in the community. So, yeah, more of the stuff like that is really what the team is hopefully going to focus on. I don't know if it's one of those things where I'm going to hold my breath on it though, but that's purely because of the fact that it's very easy to say we're attempting to revive the mystery, and it's hard to sit there and give details on that until you've actually played what they've created, because otherwise, well, there is no mystery. So it's one of those things that's very deeply ingrained, and we really can't tell until we play it for ourselves. I'm holding my breath for other things perhaps, not necessarily for that, but that's purely on the basis of I don't think you can go in there with an expectation of it, you just sort of have to see it happen, right? Because if you're looking for the mystery, it's not necessarily the same as if it just happens and the community all of a sudden starts asking, hey, who the hell is this Nezarec guy from this helmet? Or What's the story of Saint 14? You know, these things just sort of have to happen. And of course there is the note about the removal of the old seasonal narrative structure by the time Apollo comes around. I think the important thing to drive home here is that this is going to be a slower transition out of this that some people might not necessarily like. I imagine we're still going to have this exact structure in the scale of Revenant. I think the big difference is going to be that when you're going and doing stuff in Revenant, you're seeing it all happen back to back, because it's all each act immediately playing out, and you're not having to sit there and wait week by week. So you're still going to have to run back and forth from the helm, but you're going to be able to do it all in one day whenever each act drops. So that's the tone I would expect when it comes to Revenant. When it comes to everything else, I'm interested to see what they do, but I think it's also one of those moments where it really depends on how much attention the player is going to pay to all of this. And here's the thing. If you're one of those people that just runs through, does not give a damn about the story, this is clearly not for you. And if you sit there and start complaining about, I don't understand the story, I hate to say it, but we can all probably sit there and say you have no one to blame but yourself. But it doesn't mean that Bungie shouldn't actively create a net to try and catch you, because your activity also is indicative of what some new players might do who might get lost. So whilst, yeah, if you're sitting there and you're not paying attention to the people saying, hey, those are the bad guys, go shoot them, you know, you have no one to blame but yourself. But with new players, or with players who are coming back to this and who maybe need guidance on the story, it's important to have that net in place so that they can get caught by it and they can be redirected appropriately. That's my concern when it comes to it, and that's purely because they say they want everything to be more out in the destination. Not sure how that's going to feel. It's an interesting push, and I want to say that it's going to be good, because it's an alternative. But again, I think I refer to what I said earlier, which is the important thing is not necessarily the exact format in which it's delivered, it's that the format keeps changing, right? Novelty is the key of all this. Having a story that is told in a way that is appropriate to that story is something that will make sense. Like, let's sit there and say that you were doing something entirely about being a manager of a spy network, and you were receiving reports constantly from your spies in the field, and the only time you needed to go out is if one of them had been made and you needed to extract them. In that context, a bunch of radio dialogue and conversations, you know, that might make sense. It might be one of those moments where it does make a little bit of sense to sit there and constantly be monitoring things in the helm and to have updates from field agents all the time, and then to occasionally go out if you're requested on urgent leave. The problem is that structure has been pushed into everything that we have recently. However, that does mean there is no set way that stories and narrative are going to get told from now on, and it does mean that there's a chance of people getting lost. The one thing that I think was really good about the seasonal narrative is that in order for you to progress through it, you had to sit and listen. You had to go to those set points where you knew story was going to be delivered to you, and it meant that no one had the chance to miss the narrative. That's the only fear I think I have. Lastly, I wanted to go ahead and get all of your thoughts, and the reason is that I'm eternally an optimist, and rightly am accused of that on a regular basis, but even I'm sitting here, and whilst I do feel somewhat more positive after this, I still believe that we need to see more. I want to get your takes generally from within the community on this. This is something where, as per usual, I like to make this a thing of actionable feedback for the developers, so if you have your own thoughts and you think that it's something which is important for them to talk about or to focus on when it comes to the development of something like Apollo or Behemoth, go ahead and leave it down below. My personal note is the hope that they talk about encouraging new players on every level of the game. It's one of those moments where I want them to focus on the narrative and to make sure that it doesn't punish people for not understanding the deep lore, but it rewards people instead for understanding it and still keeps new players engaged at the same time. Something where there are layers to the basic understanding of it, where if you understand everything, you get the leg up, but you don't necessarily need the leg up to continue understanding the narrative itself. That's kind of what I think the golden bar of everything is that you have to kind of hit with all of these, and I think that's even more important because new players and the focus on them has to be something for Destiny. The lifeblood of this game needs to be rejuvenated by new players, so if the focus isn't there, then that's pretty important. I have no doubt the narrative team is going to try and do that because there was an active note about them talking about new players as time went on in previous articles. However, I still think that it's worth putting that reminder out there because new players are the most important point that no one is talking about in the core community, and getting more new players will help the game in the long run. It means that the game can be revived, and it means that we have a more active community to it. So, that's my thought, but what are your own? I am rightly accused of being the eternal optimist on this point, so if you're not sharing those sentiments, go ahead and let me know why down below in the comments section. Constructive stuff is useful, because I know the devs do look at these videos and they do actually take the feedback to heart. So, go ahead and let them know. All that being said though, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully you've enjoyed this quick little ramble through all of the stuff to do with Revenant and Apollo. If you did like the video, then go ahead and leave a like, and if you have your thoughts again, the comment section is wide open for you. And if you want more lore content from worlds far and wide, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, my name is Bife. Rodacia Arastra. I'll see you, Starside.